Good morning, members. I call the Committee of the Whole on Bill 14, Renewable Energy Projects Streamlined Permitting Act. To order, we are on Clause 7. Shall Clause 7 pass? Minister, do you have?
Yeah, thank you, Honourable Speaker. We ended the debate on yesterday evening with a question from the member, and I'm endeavouring to get back to the member with the specific responses, and then we'll have with some more examples, some paper responses. I'm sorry I'm a bit delayed on that, but I'll just go through it very briefly so that the member can start. Section 7.2a relates to Section 26 of the ERAA, and this provision relates to expanded responsibility provisions that were developed specifically to address the complex working interest arrangements that are typical in the oil and gas industry. These are not oil and gas projects, and that's the reason. Section 7.2b is Section 32. It's the expiration of permits and authorizations. This provision is related to the administration of ERAA permits. And ERA permits is not required for level 2 projects, and that's why it doesn't apply. Section 7.2c relates to Section 34.2 and 39.1 of the ERA. These provisions allow subsurface rights holders entry onto the surface of the land through the Surface Rights Board. The Surface Rights Board can grant entry orders on private land to ensure an oil and gas holder can access the subsurface resource. Level 2 streamlined project proponents will need to reach an agreement with any private landowners whose land they need to access. The Surface Rights Board will not be able to order entry. So that's, again, a provision that's very specific to the oil and gas industry, and that's why it's not in place here. On to Section 7.2d is around records, Section 38.1b of the ERRA. This provision requires proponents to maintain records related to emergency planning. This section is disapplied because BCRA is not regulating the construction and operation of the facility itself under Level 2 streamlining. This section does not exempt the North Coast Transmission Line project or other prescribed Level 2 projects from any other requirement to prepare and maintain emergency programs under other acts or policies. In Section 2E relates to Section 40E of the ERAA. This provision relates to the ongoing obligation after a permit has been cancelled, expired, or declared spent. Under a Level 2 project, BCER is not responsible for regulating the infrastructure itself. BCER will only issue authorizations under other natural resource statutes. There will be no prescribed requirements. BCER has other order-making powers for the purposes of restoration and public safety, and obligations under the various natural resource statutes, of course, will continue, and they're in place. 2F is Division 2.1, expanded responsibility. This provision relates to expanded responsibility provisions that were developed specifically for the oil and gas industry to allow people other than the permit holder to be held responsible for obligations under the Act. Under ERAA today, the expanded responsibility provisions only apply to oil and gas activities, not hydrogen. So it was dealt with in the bill we dealt with 3 years ago. They were designed specifically to address the complex working interest arrangements that are typical in the oil and gas industry and really reflect the 25 years of work that's been done with that industry. Section 2G, which is Part 3.1, dormant sites. These dormant site provisions require permit holders to shut down sites, e.g. wells no longer in use. These provisions were, again, specifically designed to address large portfolios of dormant wells. Under a Level 2 project, BCR does not regulate the operation of the infrastructure itself, and that's why that doesn't apply. And you see that pattern throughout. On Part 4 orphan sites, the orphan site provision allows the regulator to restore designated orphan sites under a Level 2 project. Again, BCR does not regulate the operation of the infrastructure itself. Sections 49.1a, 4d, and e, which is Section 2f, Section 7.2f. These provisions relate to BCR making orders to halt operations or change the way a facility is operating. Under a Level 2 project, BCER does not regulate the operation of the infrastructure itself. The powers will be available for Level 3 streamlined projects such as wind or solar facilities, where BCER is regulating the project similarly to an oil and gas facility. So you'll see that in Level 3, a different provision. On 2J, which is Section 51 of the ERAA, Section 72J, I should say, these powers for BCR to restrict access to highways, roads, and other areas were developed to address potential hazard conditions around pipelines and oil and gas facilities regulated by BCER. Under a Level 2 project, BCER does not regulate the operation of the infrastructure itself. That's the continuation of that theme. The Ministry of Transportation has powers to restrict access. Section 72K, Division 3.1, Public Request for Investigation of Part 5. These provisions relate to the investigation authorities that are specific to methane emissions and cannot be used for other purposes. So obviously that flows from that. And Section 7.2 L, M, and N are sections 103, 104, 111 of the ERAA. These provisions relate to different regulation-making authorities related to construction and operation of projects. Disapplying these authorities would ensure that various regulation-making authorities under ERAA do not apply to Level 2 streamlined projects for the reasons stated before. These regulation-making authorities would be used to regulate the construction and operation of projects and normally are used for projects that are permitted by BCER under ERAA. These regulation-making authorities would apply to Level 3 streamlined projects, not Level 2, for the reason we've discussed consistently, such as wind or solar projects. And I'll endeavor, we'll just make a couple of additions for examples, and we'll provide that to the honourable member for the rest of the debate.
Peace River South.
Through the chair, thank you to the minister for the very thorough response. I would like to, and I apologize, I don't know the language to request this, but I would like to table that so I have a chance to review and compare it to my notes and come back to it. And so at that point, could we perhaps move on to clause 8 and come back to 7?
Possible to stand clause 7 and move on to clause 8 and then return to clause 7 after the lunch break? Would that work? Okay. Yeah.
So if there is unanimous consent of the committee, we can stand down clause 7? Aye. Aye. Okay, and nay? Right, so clause 7 is stood down. Now, shall clause 8 pass? Aye. Aye. Recognizing the member for Peace River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am going to ask for a slight amount of latitude here in the fact that this particular question is more of a general one as opposed to being, but it is related to this piece of legislation. What we had talked about yesterday, we spent quite a bit of time talking about the definition of renewable energy. And one of the things that we did discuss was biogas. Now, this is something that I thought of last evening when the eyes wouldn't go to sleep, or wouldn't close rather. So biogas. We're looking at a process, a biochemical process, whereby we have decomposition of organic material. The byproduct of that decomposition is primarily methane. Natural gas. We have decomposition of organic material with a byproduct that is primarily methane. I question in my own mind, from a very basic scientific definition, where the differences between those two are. One obviously has had significantly more media attention and more challenges around factual information being shared in a lot of cases. So my question to the minister would be, again, going back to the possibility of expanding those definitions. Perhaps I'll make it more general. Could you help me understand where the differences actually lie and why those two are treated so differently? Thank you.
Minister.
I want the member to know two things. One, there's a replay of this debate about 2, 3 in the morning that might assist him in his sleeping patterns. Just suggesting that. I say that without drawing any conclusions about my own participation in that. I'm told, and the second thing, which is sort of an admission, is I didn't do super well at grade 10 science. Can I admit that in this house? Are we in a safe space to admit these things? I did better in grade 11 for some reason. I don't know why. But I'm told that biogas really comes from the waste humans create, and therefore more can be created. It's renewable in that sense, and why the Act was expanded to include it, which makes sense. Natural gas, of course, which is our largest export as a good and a major factor, and subsurface rights depletes. And that's the difference, I understand. And I want to note that the people involved obviously take these issues seriously. I think the natural gas industry has lots of advantages and is at a different level, obviously, than the biogas industry, which has real opportunities, both for assisting our economy and for assisting on issues of climate change and other things. So I think it's important, but obviously natural gas is a different level, has a different level of regulation, and has in fact had this Bill 14's kind of regulation for the last 25 years. But that's the difference. As it was explained to me, I want to be clear.
Member for Peace River South.
Through the chair, I agree 100% with that assessment. I think it was important to me to just get it on the record that essentially we're talking about two processes that, and I do very clearly understand the differences between biogas generation and natural gas, but I think it is important to get it on the record that we are calling biogas a green product. Natural gas is being treated in an exceptionally different way. So I think that is important for the folks that are watching and to get that on the record. And that, again, it's a very, very simplified. We're not talking about the brine water that may come up with it or any of the other issues that may or may not be associated with it. But again, I appreciate the latitude, and I did really want to get that. I really did want to get that onto the record. Moving on, with respect to Clause 8, can the minister outline which projects that are currently intended to be added via regulation to this section?
Minister.
Well, thank you, and thank you to the member. I would say that part of the intent of the bill is to do the opposite of what he suggested, which is to apply the same sort of one-window regulation that has been successful for the natural gas industry. And you could see that success immediately in 1988 and 89 when the new legislation came into place. And then subsequent to that, there are other factors, of course, as there are over time, including commodity prices and everything else, but that overall we are applying the same one-window regulation to biogas, in effect, and to renewable projects that we've been applying for a long time to that sector. So in a sense, if there's inequality, it was the other way, inequality in regulation up to now. And that's what I think is really valuable about the legislation, but why I support the BC Energy Regulator as well in the work that it does. I should say that initially the government intends to prescribe wind and solar projects as level 3 streamlined projects. For level 3 streamlined projects, the BCR will be responsible for most of the natural resource authorization. This is where it's similar to hydrogen and to the oil and gas industries associated with the projects, as well as most other aspects of the project activity, including site planning, safe construction and operations, decommissioning, and restoration. So full life cycle regulation. Level 3 streamlined projects allow the same framework we use under the Energy Resource Activities Act for oil, gas, and hydrogen, right, as I've just noted, to be applied in whole or selectively to support the regulation of renewable energy projects. Subject to the regulations, of course, the following elements of the Energy Resource Activities Act will apply to Level 3 renewable energy project. Project proponents will be required to apply to BCER for permits under the ERAA. These permits provide for the life cycle regulation of the activity from site planning and construction to deactivation and restoration, an approach which the member will be familiar with from the natural gas industry. The Lieutenant Governor and Council will have regulation-making powers in relation to Level 3 projects, such as the power to make regulations related to environmental protection and management of off-site environmental mitigation and how BCR carries out its authorities. The Board of BCR will be able to make regulations related to Level 3 projects, including with respect to consultation and notification, permit and application requirements, and security. The Level 3 projects will be subject to comprehensive compliance and enforcement provisions meant to ensure safe and sustainable projects from construction to deactivation and restoration. So the intent here, different from the Level 2 projects and why there's the distinction, is life cycle regulation, which is crucial, is one window regulation, which is important. It's, of course, maintaining standards and the capacity to ensure that the regulation is effective as it needs to be, and as it is, I believe, in the sectors that BCR is responsible for, and that's the approach here to Level 3 projects. I want to give a longer response just to put all that in context, and I'm happy to take further questions from the member, of course.
Peace River South.
Through the chair, I'd like to thank the minister for identifying that perhaps my example wasn't as clear as I wanted it to be when I was doing the, for the purposes of the transcript, I don't know how to describe what it is that I'm doing, but showing hand movements, I guess, for the purposes of the transcript. I wasn't meaning to imply that the regulatory regime was treating natural gas to an unfair advantage. I was referring more to public perception in that respect. So thank you for pointing that out. My next question on Clause 8, is the minister able to identify projects that are not specifically, ooh, you know what, I'm going to skip that one. That actually doesn't make sense. Must have been tired when I wrote that one. Next question. We've seen the government be able to pass a bill all stages in one sitting day. And then, of course, the carbon tax, where we all had a beautiful evening in this wonderful place. And I'm curious if there was any consideration given through this bill of why additional projects haven't been brought or are not intended to be brought before the legislature, but be done through regulation.
Minister.
So, as we discussed in previous sections, we've identified wind and solar projects which were successful in the call for power and the North Coast transmission line. We've talked about other projects as well, North Montney transmission, which is, I think, a really exciting project that's really a tribute to the commitment of the natural gas industry as well, who are obviously are our partners in that effort, but will have a significant impact on, I think, the value of BC natural gas and also on the climate. And so we had that proposal. We also have, as the member will know, a new call for power on new projects. But those projects don't exist yet, obviously. We have a call for power and a rigorous process and competitive bidding, and all of those things will occur, right? And so we can't name or discuss in the legislation because we don't know what they are. But we know that there will be other projects that this will apply to, and that we know from the most recent round, because of the competitiveness of wind and solar, we'll expect some of them to be wind and solar. And so that's the intention up to now, to do those. But if the member's asking why we haven't identified all of the projects now, we haven't identified all of the projects now because there isn't a successful competitive bids and they're not projects yet, but they will be. And so that's the reason why you put legislation in place, not just for this list of projects, but to change the way we regulate renewable energy, which is the core focus of this bill and this section, and also and parallel it to other forms of energy which have single window regulation on the one hand, which is really important, I think, and to help us proceed with these projects, but others in the future. There is no question that we envision other renewable projects in the future. We just announced the second call for power, but the names of those projects or what they are will be determined by the competitive bids that are put forward in that call for power, and I have every confidence that it will be successful.
Member for Peace River South.
Through the chair, I'd like to thank the minister for that answer and apologize to him and his staff for the repetition of the question. That was, yes, it was answered, and I guess long hours, we all tend to slip here and there. With that being said, I'm going to hand over to my colleague.
Member for Surrey Right Rock.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This time I'd like to table an amendment. I know that we're close to the lunch hour, but I can put it forward now and maybe we can come back to it, or we can address it now, whatever the chair wishes.
Well, we would need to take a 5-minute recess to review.
Okay. What's that?
Come back after lunch.
I think, yeah, thank you. So what we'll do is we'll take the amendment, and then if you want to speak to it, then we're going to adjourn for lunch, and then we can come back and after lunch and finish up with the amendment.
Great. Okay, so the proposed amendment, Section 8, deleting the text, number 8, this division applies in relation to taking out the word prescribed, Level 3 Streamline Project in my name. So with this amendment here, it proposes to eliminate the ability of government to add any project they choose under Division Level 3 streamlining. This is a conversation we've continually had over the last, I'd say, closing in on 24 hours, just about the guardrails, right? And the ability for government, and I keep saying, picking winners and losers. So I think that this amendment should be supported, and I can have further comments after lunch, if it's deemed to be in order.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair, and I'll reserve my comments on the amendment to after lunch hour, and so move that the committee rise, report progress, and ask leave to sit again.
Members, we've heard the question. All in favor? Aye. So ordered. We are adjourned.